Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. So we're going to have a look in this video about how to get generated documentation from the tests that we've written in specflow. So let's start with what we're going to get as the output to begin with. So here in my Azure DevOps, you can see I've got this specflow living document tab. So I've added an extension that lets me get the living document specflow bit. Now, I guess one point to note here is the extension does have some limitations. So I think if you're running multiple repos, you might have some challenges around how to get your test to display here. This is focused around a single repo with tests in it, I think is what the extension does. Now, in the documentation in the integration playbook, I'll share a link to an article I've written about how you can share the living document output to SharePoint, which I think is quite a good way of sharing it with other users. But let's focus on what can be achieved with living documents. So here you can see I've got this documentation starting to show up here, and what it's doing is for all of the tests I've created, you can see here I've got like a tree showing the tests that are in my project. I've got the test sort of results here, passes and fails, and what I can do is I can go into my feature here. So I've got my ship instruction feature, and I can click on the individual tests, and on the right hand side you'll be able to see some output appearing. So I've got the feature, I've got some documentation explaining what the feature does, I've got some notes about how it works, and then I've even got a link here for more info, so I can click that link and it should open up. Click that again. Ooh, maybe that's not a good link. Yeah. There we go, it did open up. So you can see here I've got like a README file in the repo with a bit of extra information about what the document, about how the ship instruction feature works. So you can see you can link out from your test to more documentation if you wanted to. Let's just go back and get that working again. Okay, so here we go. So back in our ship instruction test, if we have a look at this green path one, so we had some links to documentation here. We can also put links to work items here. So if you click on this work item, it'll open up a user story that matches something that test's implementing. So here we've got my ship instruction green path user story where I could have all the documentation about what it's supposed to do and how it works. And you can get from your tests to the original requirements. Now, what you'll notice in the steps here is the specflow test steps are appearing in a sort of more user-friendly format, so I can read them if I'm not a coder. So I could sit with a business analyst and we can go through these steps, and they can sort of see what's going on, and it kind of gives you an idea of what the logic app's implementing. So we can see the logic app receives a message, passes the request, looks up data, does a transformation, and you can see that becomes quite easy to understand how your process works, which is really great. Now, the next step after that is I can actually now show the test output, and you'll see what I've been able to do is capture example messages from this test execution. So I can say I send the message to the logic app, and this is what the message that the test used would look like. And I can see that how easy that looks. I can see what the example message coming back would look like. So I've got some good examples. I can work with an analyst who might be trying to work out how we would change this workflow. They can see kind of what's going on. Likewise, I've got other scenarios. So this ship instruction, there might be 4 or 5 test cases that just execute this workflow, so we can kind of go through these here and have a look what they're doing. So in this one here, we're publishing an event where the commodity is different and it should do different things as a result of that. So that's all good. We've got this nice documentation. The question is, how did we get that? So back in VS Code, if we go and look in my acceptance tests and my ship instruction feature, so there's a couple of things here. So the first one is in the specflow file, you'll notice that compared to a hello world scenario, this is a much richer file with more in it. So normally you might just put feature with an as or that, but I can do things like this tag here. If I put I've put as the kind of a prefix on the tag that I have to configure in my build pipeline, I'll show in a minute. But I can basically say this tag here points to this work item ID. So that work item we looked at's ID was 55. We've got another one here that's 56, and the build task will actually generate links from that. We can also put extra notes. So these notes you can just kind of freehand type in here. We can put HTML in as well, and it'll generate things like the hyperlink there for that more documentation, which is really cool. And you can see, a lot about what's actually going on in the test here just by kind of adding notes that will help people understand it. So I would often put notes for the developer of the test. I might put notes for the analyst to explain context and things like that. And it's just really augmenting your test with more information. So it's kind of like bringing the documentation into the code and kind of joining it together. Now, what else you can do is in the code behind for your test, so you can add the NuGet package for, so we add the living document packages, which kind of gives us that, and I think it's just that that namespace that we need to import. And what I can do is I get access to this iSpecflow output helper, which means I can write custom stuff into the specflow log. So here I use the dependency injection to kind of set that up. And then as we go through the test, you'll see, I'll try and find a good example of this. So we're a bit further down. So you can see here's a good example. So what I'm doing here is the workflow executes a transform. So this is going to be a liquid transform from JSON to text, which is really producing an XML document. So when we run the test, we check that that executes successfully. But then I've got these helper methods on the Logic App Test Manager where I can go, right, get me the action input message, and then here I'm converting it to JSON. So I get this JSON message, and I can get the action output message as well. And that basically gives me that for that transform shape, I've now got the JSON that we put in and the XML that we get out. And then I can do some stuff with that. So here I'm doing some tests to make sure it is what I expect. But for living document, really what I'm doing is I'm writing into the specflow trace. Here's the input message, and here's the output message, and I'm just kind of like adding them to that log, which means when we go back to DevOps here, if we look, so we need the test output shown. You'll see there's the map input message here, and then we should have the XML message down here, and that's where they would appear in that log. So you can easily see what the messages look like, and all you've actually done is just added these few log lines here. And you don't just have to put sample messages in; you could put anything you wanted. If you want to put some diagnostics from the code execution, that would work just as well. In the DevOps pipeline, so the bit that really does the specflow bit is when I, because I've got the living document packages in my solution. So let's just take a second to have a look here. So you'll see we've got the specflow living document plugin here. So that's what adds living document to your tests. And in the DevOps pipeline, when I run the tests here, it'll actually produce an XML file as part of the test execution that living document's going to build when the tests run. That'll tell it all the information that goes into that living document plugin in DevOps. And then all I really need is the plugin, the DevOps task that gets added as part of the extension, and that lets me publish that XML file. So you'll see here we're pointing to a folder, we're giving it the path to the project file, and there'll be a file called testexecution.json that the test run produces. That'll be what gets sent to living document, and then the thing about the workflow, the link to the work item in the test. So what I'm doing is saying here, this parameter tells me what path to use for my work items, and it's going to populate the ID, and then it tells me the prefix for the tag. So if it spots any tags like DevOps_WY, it knows that the value on the other side of the colon is going to be this ID, so it'll generate that URL into the living document. That's how it links to the work items. So you can see really all I had to do was add one task to my pipeline, and suddenly it's generating my documentation for me. So hopefully that shows it's really not a lot of effort if you're using specflow to add living document to it and take your test to the next level and also generate documentation. Thanks for listening.